years old at this point. That might be out of date. I would say a slightly newer incarnation of this is whether you hold to the establishment or you're somewhere along the fringes. And admittedly, the fringes hold some saints as well as some reprobates. Hold some people, who, from whatever your perspective, if you're on the outside of the system looking in, you're going to disagree with a lot of people, agree with some people. But I think that is the polarization. It's a polarization of a center that's losing its center. And I'll admit, the only hope that I have here is that people, in a sort of economic sense, in a supply and demand sense, they're so desperate for reality. People get so desperate for what's true that they try again and again to break out of the establishment status quo's hold on information until finally that status quo breaks. There are signs this was happening in recent years. In any event, not sure it'll be happening anytime soon. We're joined by Jim Jatras, Washington, D.C.-based government and media relations specialist. Follow Jim on Twitter at Jim Jatras. That's Jatras, Jim Jatras. You're listening to Fault Lines. We'll be back on the other side of this break in just a minute.
Fault Lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. Don't surrender.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of the Capitol, Washington, D.C. Joining us is Jim George Jatras, a Washington, D.C.-based government and media relations specialist. He is also attorney licensed in the District of Columbia in Pennsylvania, who has appeared before the U.S. Supreme Court and has previously served as U.S. diplomat and U.S. state staffer. Wow, that is an amazing resume. Thinking about the Trump issue and the incoming Biden administration, I have to be honest, I bristle at the idea that Trump was cheated just because of the hijinks and the tactics that Republicans have used over the period of time. But look, I am one of those people that I want to get to the bottom of who won, regardless of who that is. I want to bounce something off of you that started with me as kind of a joke, but eventually became a thought that I think is actually real. Of all the Republicans that were running in the various administrations that pulled in the African-American vote, oftentimes, with Obama, of course, Obama was pulling in 90%, but Trump was able to up the amount that he was getting. And it made me realize that Donald Trump, if he would have ran or had a different presidency, could have made significant inroads in that black vote. What do you think about that? Do you think that's impossible? I mean, he often touts this notion of his, unemployment. But as the president of the United States, Donald Trump has enough credibility from his side to do that in a way that Biden or a Democrat couldn't, because the Democrat would get called weak, you're doing favoritism, you're catering to a race, etc. Donald Trump would never get called with that. It's kind of like Nixon going to China. He had the opportunity to do something that wasn't there, meaning this kind of bravado about, hey, look at black unemployment. Well, that could have went further beyond that. And if he wanted to win that race, he could have basically tried to make a play for the black vote in a way that undermined the Democratic Party's stranglehold on that demographic. What do you think about that line of reasoning? Or is it, no, there was no way Donald Trump could have upped his lot with the black vote?
I really don't know. There have been some claims that he did improve his share of the black vote somewhat, although that's based on exit polls. And of course, we know that people who are voting on election day were more likely to be Trump voters anyway. So we don't know how accurate that sample is. For what it's worth, out there on Saturday, there were some African Americans with the pro-Trump crowd, although a fairly small percentage. I would say maybe about 1%. A surprisingly large number of Asians and Hispanic, at least visually, that I could see from the crowd. I think Trump did try to do that with his platinum plan, with his touting his aid to historically black colleges and universities and so forth. I don't know how much it actually worked. It seems that he also, among demographic groups, he actually did not do as well with actually white male voters, especially those who are not college educated, which are actually his bedrock constituency. And of course, as you pointed out, during his campaign, he was always talking about how well he was doing jobs-wise for Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, women, and so forth. He never really talked about his bedrock constituency, and maybe that's because if he had done so, since he's already, Orange Hitler anyway, that would have just simply cemented the fact that he was really a white supremacist, racist Nazi or something. So I think it was a really difficult walk for him to make, between, on the one side, trying to appeal to more black voters while not abandoning what his core base was, but at the same time appealing to his base in a way that doesn't further the accusation that he's not going to escape anyway, that he's a racist. So I think in a way it was like a Venn diagram where the circles don't intersect. How do you appeal more to the black vote without alienating your white constituency and vice versa?
Well, also, I mean, so one of the main things here that could have factored into it, other than what you were saying, which is the exit polling, the fact that would have been skewed towards Trump in the first place, is the Platinum Plan. Late September through late October, this was occasionally being talked about. That feels like it's too little, too late here. A big plan, primarily invested at communities that would have impacted, that would help Black Americans. But again, this is towards the tail end of his first term. It's an election promise, basically, assuming Biden gets in, I don't see the administration following through on that. Admittedly, I didn't see anything of anything of a similar magnitude coming from Biden, which is just, from a traditional policy perspective, definitely breaks down, what you'd expect to see from Republicans and Democrats. Where do you think this is going to go, especially on the tails of this summer's protests, Black Lives Matter, whatever you think of them? Where do you think this is going to go in coming years? Do you think we're going to see more of this, Jim? More of these kinds of plans? What do you think that would look like, if so? Or do you think this is merely a momentary gesture from a president who's simply trying to get reelected, Jim?
I think at least rhetorically we'll see more of it, because I think if Biden and Harris do get in, we are going to see the sort of, let's say, the universalization of critical race theory across the board in America, that they will double down on identity politics, because they do, I think, in a very real sense, see the legacy core American demographic, which is essentially white people in flyover country, as a kind of an enemy to be subdued. That basically those people need to be put in a microscope. They need to be, this is where you get to things like the blacklist or the Robert Reich accountability project, where anybody who voted for Trump or supported Trump or has a MAGA hat is essentially presumptively some kind of a Nazi. And they need to be basically shunned at work or put into a situation where they have to apologize for existing. And I think that I don't think that really does anything for Black people or for the non-white population, but it does treat the largest demography in America as a presumptive enemy. And I think we will see more and more of that, and not just regarding race, but also with regarding to sex, sexuality, gender identification, ethnicity, immigration status, and so forth, that this whole kind of a laundry list of victims and oppressors that will be used as a kind of an ideological weapon, in the same way that proletarian versus bourgeois existed in the Soviet Union.
I wonder, I know for political reasons, Democrats do that, meaning, I don't want to deal with the real economic concerns of the population that would benefit blacks, whites, gays, straights, trans, etc., across the board. I don't want to do that. So I'm going to focus on issues of identity. So I'm going to talk about race. I'm going to drag John Lewis from the grave and throw him out saying that guy was a progressive, so leave us alone. That nonsense. Like, it's aggravating to me, because it's like, I know you guys have been hard hit by healthcare in the African-American community and Hispanic community. So what I'm going to do to help you guys is we're going to give you Kamala Harris. Aren't you excited about this black woman being in vice president? It's the stupidest thing ever. And they do it constantly, as if, her blackness or Obama's blackness somehow gives people health care. It doesn't. It just doesn't. It doesn't work that way. How do you view these guys who come out? I mean, it just seems like they're so lacking in regards to their capabilities. Like, I got to be honest, I am annoyed that Joe Biden won this race, because it felt like it was so, as Shane called it, inert. It wasn't a push for anything in particular. It wasn't trying to get anything necessarily accomplished. I want to win because I want to win. It's a point on my resume. And then it's like, after the fact, I get this feeling that Kamala Harris, is put there because they want her to be president and just kind of escort her way through because she can't necessarily win a race. No, I have all sorts of feelings about this particular race that even go beyond this notion of Donald Trump conceding. How do you frame all of this? If 10 years pass and you had to look back over, let's say, the last 4 years, how do you frame it? How do you process it? And you can answer this. This is wide open any way you want. I'm just curious about, based on your resume and based on the things that you've done, you've had a history where you can kind of give a larger context than, let's say, Shane or I, who haven't necessarily been around that long and part of the system.
That, what you described doesn't make a whole lot of sense if your real purpose in governing is to try to help people of any description, white, black, green, purple, brown, whatever they might be. But if your purpose is control, if your purpose is to make sure that this will have been the last competitive national election in American history and have a permanent woke regime that will be able to enforce its ideology and the wishes of the corporate plutocracy and what really amounts, we've heard all this talk about the Great Reset recently, what Justin Trudeau said recently about how the virus was an opportunity to achieve this new restructuring of everything, really, literally everything, for the economy and so forth. I think that's what we're looking at here. That we're going. This is where I think that the new regime, if it comes to pass, will be very quick to lock down the economy again, to try to turn more and more people into essentially serfs dependent upon government largesse under the guise of a universal basic income. I think we will see a radical shift in all sorts of human relations, not only in terms of what kind of contact you can have with other people, how well you can travel, but what your economic relationship will be like and whether you will be allowed to have a job, go to school, have utilities, get a bank account, unless you have somehow saluted and paid homage to the narrative you're told is obligatory, unless you want to be considered a hater or a conspiracy theorist. I would look and see what C.J. Hopkins has written about this recently, and also what Rod Dreher is saying about the soft totalitarian order that we're now, I think, entering if this I'll call it a coup, succeeds. And as things stand right now, it looks very much like it will succeed.
Real quick, I just did a quick Google search, couldn't find his name or her name. Who's C.G. Hopkins? Could you just maybe briefly spell that?
He's a writer. If you look up, I'm trying to think what his latest piece was called. His key phrase is globocap. It's like globocop, except cap for capitalism. That let's not make any mistake here. And this is where I think the left and right really are totally out of date. Whether we're talking about, the mega peds who supported Trump or the Bernie bros, I think that was a kind of a cry from regular, ordinary working people who realize that something is terribly wrong, that big business and big government are in cahoots together, and they do not have their interests at heart, but that the tools of the political system to try to actually do something about it are really gone. That we know how Bernie had the election nomination stolen from him, in my opinion, on 2 occasions, on the Democratic side, and how on the Republican side, Trump did manage to scramble out in 2016, but sadly really didn't accomplish all that much in his first and possibly only term in office. And once he's gone, globocap, as C.J. Hopkins puts it, is, I think, here to stay for a long time, perhaps forever.
Jim, we're out of time. I hear the derision in your voice, and in my opinion, I believe it's justified when it comes to looking at the prognosis of our American system. I'm sad to say. Again, though, out of time. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
We're joined there by James George Jatras, Washington, D.C.-based government and media relations specialist, also an attorney licensed in D.C. and Pennsylvania. He has appeared before the U.S. Supreme Court and has previously served as a U.S. diplomat and U.S. Senate staffer. And you can follow him on Twitter at Jim Jatras. That is Jatras, Jim Jatras, and read his articles at jimjatras.info. We're going into a break right here, but we're taking calls on the other side. You can call in 202-521-1320. Again, Going into a break, you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones? With the historical context to tie them together? Well, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host, Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
And we are back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we are taking your phone calls. The number there is 202-521-1320, or in a more abbreviated form, 202-521-1320. We've got Brave calling in from Atlanta. Brave, you are on the line. What's on your mind?
Hey, good morning, fellas. Your guest, especially that last part, I totally agree with him, and he's dead on. I would just move up the timeline. I don't think we're approaching it. I think it's there. I don't know if you guys saw the article or the postings from the Gray Zone yesterday or a few days ago by Ben Norton talking about Richard Stengel. Have you guys seen that?
Yeah. I believe that was in our headlines yesterday too, talking about Richard Stengel. Basically head of like U.S.'s propaganda arm, effectively, in the Biden incoming team. Anyway, what's going on, Brady?
Yeah, basically, the stuff like that is it's kind of scary. It's extremely alarming, especially when you look at just for instance, this morning I'm taking my wife into work, and I'm listening to a local station here with Ricky Smiley, and they're talking about how MAGA people that voted for MAGA, didn't care about democracy, don't care about democracy, and basically saying that because they don't see things the way, say, I would see things as a black man, then they never cared about democracy. And then you look at other statements from other media outlets, especially, I'm speaking specifically to like the black community. When I listen to media outlets and things, these memes are being propagated, saying that we should never forgive these people. And then you look at AOC talking about, building a list and things of that nature. These things are worrying. I often make a joke about 1984 with my wife, talking about, the Orwellian sort of going on now. I actually went and rented the movie last night and watched again just to watch it and to see how crazy the parallels are and how it's not that far-fetched anymore. So I think that is the actual fight, because the wars and stuff, that's the given. We're going to get that with the Biden administration. I think the true fight is now with the subjugation of the people and the people who are really drones. And the last thing I'll say is that I wouldn't say that this is a coup. I would just say this is another step in a grand plan that's been formulated, that's been carried out. I think that Donald Trump, to a certain extent, played a part, maybe unwillingly, but he provided opportunity. He provided opportunity by breaking down so many norms. And now you have the people that support Biden, people behind Biden, and Biden themselves saying, okay, good job, bro. We're going to get you out because we don't like the way you draw attention to our business, but we're going to take the bike and show you how to pop a wheelie with it. And I think that's what we're really finna see now, because they're really locking things down concerning just the public and our voices at large, period.
Here's the thing, Bradley, Brave, go for it, Jamarl. I've got some stuff to say too, but please go for it.
Shane, do your thing.
Well, so here's the thing. I'm pretty sure Jamarl and I agree. There are plans, but I don't know if there is a grand plan. I don't know who would be orchestrating that plan. We can have that conversation, but this is something I'm kind of perennially skeptical of, the idea that things are guided in some sense, because I see it as a safety net. If you assume that there's somebody guiding things, in some sense, that's an optimism, because you assume that there are people powerful enough to have their hands on the reins. And at this point, I think the world system as a whole, the United States, let alone the world system, is basically out of control. Nobody can control it. It's a runaway beast. It's like a herd of mavericks or something like this, or a draft horse team that's completely unmoored. Anyway, in my opinion, that's more pessimistic, because if you can't get a hold on it, if it's just this runaway disequilibrium thing that's spiraling out of control, where the heck do you grow? Where we fundamentally do agree, however, as we were talking about with Jim Jodress, at least from my perspective, is the increasing tightening, like you were talking about, by the media, specifically by internet giants in cahoots with Washington, trying to tamp down on the ability to freely express your thoughts, your opinions, etc. I mean, I guess, there's stuff to disagree with there, stuff to agree with there. But anyway, thank you, Brave, for the call. Jamarl, what's your take?
So I think I agree with you, Shane. I don't think there's anybody hand on the wheel. In fact, honestly, that's more terrifying. If there's a hand on the wheel, at the very least, there's somebody trying to keep stability because they want to either make the profits or have a situation that's stable for them. But if there's no hand on the wheel, and we have to admit that, we sleepwalk into conflict. I mean, think back to World War I. Was there a hand on the wheel back then? No, there was not a hand on the wheel. And those countries literally fell into a conflict. Think of World War II. Now, yes, you can say it's an extension of World War I, but, those type of questions depend on how far you want to go back. I guess my point is, we have ended up in our history in radically bad situations. And in none of those situations was there a hand on the wheel. There were people fighting for that wheel, fighting to get their hands on it. And within the context of that fighting, being willing to do very ghastly things. So personally, I agree with Shane. I think that's more cynical. If somebody's hand was on the wheel, at the very least you have a minder, even if you disagree with the minder. When there's nobody, like the episode of Supernatural is that you live in a godless world. And he was like, don't you realize how mind-blowing that is? That there's no there's nothing undergirding this. Reality doesn't have any safety nets in that. This is just us. And when it collapses, it collapses. So that's my
more people trying to get their hands on the wheel. What happens to the wheel as a bunch of people are trying to get their hands on the wheel? It gets increasingly volatile. The direction that the wheel, I mean, just literally physically, I don't want to overextend a metaphor here, but it applies. The more people who are trying to get their hands on the wheel, the more of a contest there is over this stuff, the more volatile it gets, because people with different intentions, different motivations, different modus operandi, they will spin the wheel. They will spin the wheels of the state out of control in different directions. And we see that happening. And I'm worried that it's going to keep happening and that, the rate is going to go up. We got another caller. I can come back to this little poem a little bit later. William Butler Yeats, The Second Coming, a bit there I wanted to get to. But we got Potomac Jonathan calling in from Potomac. Jonathan.
He's out. He's out.
He's out. Oh, that's a shame. All right, you know what? I'm just going to go straight into it. Two brief little sections here I wanted to read. Second Coming by William Butler Yeats, classic poem of apocalyptic poetry. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. And then I'm going to skip ahead. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Those are sharp lines. I'm just going to stop right there. The reason I'm bringing this up is it has to do with polarization. It has to do with us losing our center morally, ideologically, in terms of what we believe, where we're going. Admittedly, maybe that center was a fabrication from the beginning. But what happens when you lose it? It's like you get these centripetal forces that push you further and further and further into the fringes, and people competing over the wheels of the state, competing over the reins. What are they competing over? Frankly, they're competing over the opinions of other people. They're competing rhetorically to capture individual subsets of our democracy. And what we're seeing happen, people get more polarized. People get more and more disconnected from each other. You get split up and balkanized in a sort of cultural sense. And people are competing fundamentally on that basic level with each other. And I'm worried, with the lockdowns, with the breakdown of our political system, and with the establishment media's co-optation of internet media through the IT giants, I'm just worried that this stuff is going to keep going on. And I'm worried, frankly, from a personal perspective, when am I going to lose my moorings? Like, how the heck do we even know? And this is the thing with fake news going back to 2015, 2016. This is the sort of existential perspective on this. If you lose your bearings, if you're lost in the wilderness, how do you get back to home? What brings you back? What brings you back to some sense of sanity, let alone safety? Jamarl, I mean, I might be kind of freewheeling here going over a bunch of different stuff. What's your take?
I used to ask, where's the floor? That's the same question. Where's the floor? Because, it seemed, I remember when I first started this, it was like all of these perspectives and which one is right. And then when you get beyond the perspectives, you say, okay, is there something below those? Is there an objective reality here? where we can all put our hand on this table and say, this is a table indeed. And where is that? And unfortunately, in real terms, reality is difficult, and integrity is not necessarily is expensive. And so, people spin tails in order to prevent that reality from being shown, or at the very least, put 30 different other competing ideas for reality, so that particular real thing gets, engulfed. It's hard. I mean, oftentimes you're stuck in this position of, okay, where do you want to go? What direction do you want to go? And it's almost like you're guided by the direction, not by the lies, if that makes sense. Because you almost are stuck with this notion of, okay, things are going to be a 0 to 1, and you try to do your best in figuring out what's closer to 1. And you try to move there. But you're just a person. And all information that's going to come to you is going to come to you from somebody else, from some other source that is going through all sorts of filters. By the time it gets to you, is it true? Is it some way true? How much of it can you believe? How much of it do you know? And then you start comparing it with other bits of information. Yeah, it's not easy. Reality allows us no outs on that. And, this is information warfare. It's just kind of is what it is, unfortunately, in our society when reality takes a back seat. I mean, because keep in mind, if I tell you something that's true and you don't like it, well, you may have a response to that. But the thing that's not true may be in my best interest. So if it's in my best interest and I need you to go along with it, telling you the truth is not going to get you to go along with it. I'm incentivized to tell you something that's not true. I think that's politics. I think that's media. I think media gets used in pursuit of those lies. No, we have a screwy system, and there's never an interrogation of that. Or there's never this kind of reflection or introspection in regards to it. I mean, for God's sake, we drove this country to war. The media did. Not just back with Spain, also for the Iraq war. That lead up. They were getting rid of Donahue. They got rid of Jesse Ventura. Anybody that was against that war, they got rid of those people. And what did they do? They led up in the march to war. After that march to war, Dick Cheney would give testimony, like the secret informant, and then turn around and reference his own secret information as if that was some kind of news. It was astonishing what the newspapers did. No reflection on their failure. Russiagate, no reflection. The Syria whistleblowers, no reflection. I mean, it's not. It's
that's disincentivized. You're talking about economic incentives, political incentives. In some sense, these are as old as human history, if not older. You're incentivized to lie. The whole decoy, deception, camouflage thing is literally biological, obviously. But of course, we do it too with our words and our lies. It's frustrating, man. I think coming back to what you were saying fundamentally, you're saying you're in the forest, you're stuck in this nest of problems. But what you do have deep down is your own moral compass. You have your own vision of where you want to drive your life, what the world should look like, those kinds of things. Am I getting that right? Is that kind of what you were saying? Is that like your come from or where you come back to ultimately?
Because I don't know how else to go or proceed.
Yeah. I hear you on that one. That is the base ground there. I mean, but you know what? I don't even mean to be more pessimistic, and we don't have enough time for it. But even then, what happens when you interrogate your values? What happens when you actually start to question that stuff? On what grounds do you question that stuff? Because then you're kind of back to square one. You're back to questioning the thing that was supposed to give you certainty. I don't know. That's philosophy. That's religion. I don't know what it comes down to. We're definitely trying. We're closing today's show out. Thank you, engineer Andre. Thank you, producers Cam and Raheem. And thank you, Jamarl, for the fascinating conversations and co-stewardship of this show. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. We will be back tomorrow with more. Signing off, Fault Lines.
Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Guys, I know our Wi-Fi cut off on us in the middle of the show. So I'm not sure how many people are going to be here, but I appreciate. Oh, we have like 160 people. Nice. Gardno, fuck Google, Bud Nevada, right on Bud Nevada, Lydia Christmas, Spider 77, Monetized Dissent. I love that. Monetized Dissent. Philosophy is a side effect of a full stomach. Is it? Is that what that is? Stay strong, be well. We're trying. Don't let that mic outsmart you. I know, right? Have you seen that shit? It's like you hit the button and nothing happens. And then you hit it again, nothing happens. And then you hit it, goes off. And then it's like you're trying to restart and you hit it and the shit's not happening. It's just aggravating. Let's see. Says human. I'd argue that your morality is still relevant on the principle or reality of the universe. It might be inaccessible or accurate. Well, I mean, it's not accurate or inaccurate. Your moral moorings are your own moral moorings, right? I mean, if you're the only thing in existence, what goes. Like, if there's no higher opinion above your own, and in that situation, there wouldn't be a higher opinion. In our society, there are things that are in our best interest from the standpoint of making us healthy or making us ill, or that are in the best interest of society in of itself, meaning a porn star may make a lot of money, but an engineer is more beneficial to raising a society, even though he may satisfy his girlfriend or wife a little bit better. These things seem to go in line with what skill is necessary for a particular environment and whether that's beneficial or not. But that's different than this kind of overarching idea of value. In the grand sense of the universe just doesn't give a shit. And from us as a society, the way we interact with each other is emergent. It's not, like your morality is not a fixed thing. It's not a constant. It's relative in a society that you're in, where all of you are kind of floating around and say, okay, this is based on this level of technological development, based on this level of infrastructure, based on this level of XYZ. This is the way we interact with each other. I don't have to exert the energy to potentially rob that guy if I'm doing pretty decent. I have a dog and a wife and a car. I'm good. Like, it's entirely dependent upon your society and your environment. It's not inherent. It's not, you're in a war zone. Your wife needs to eat. Your kid needs to eat. Your kid is sick. That kid is probably going to die without food and medicine. You, as a father, go out looking for it. You find an elderly couple. That elderly woman is going to die. You know she's going to die. He has medicine. He has food. He doesn't want to give you either because he wants to stay there with his wife and attend to her. What do? Do you let your wife die and walk away knowing this woman is going to die? Or do you take the meds and the food, leave him enough, and go about your business and save your wife? Now, there is no situation in this where you leave unscathed. There is no out. Whether you take it or whether you leave it, there's no out. What's the right choice? What's the moral choice in this? And the fact of the matter is there a moral choice at all? I mean, the morality thing gets difficult. It's very, very difficult. Yes, environment changes. Totally. Nazi thought their morality means that we're above it all, right? And their ultimate God in the world. Well, think of it this way for the moment. If the Nazis won, let's pretend for the moment that the Nazis, instead of landed on American soil, let's say 500 years ago, what would they have done to the native population? They would have exterminated them. How would they have exterminated them? Well, they would have used the means at their disposal during that time to do so. We, the United States, did the exact same thing. And after we exterminated the Native Americans because we needed that land, we had a manifest destiny. And, all things being equal, we wanted to grow and flourish. And we wanted to take this land to do it. They were in our way. Well, I'm making the point that the same thing was true from the way that the Nazis was dealing with the Russians, with this thought that we can take the land, we can have living space, we can turn these guys into slaves and serfs and etc. The difference is when the Russians, in their head for military strategy, thought modern war is expensive in regards to the number of lives. And we need to be able to recreate our military back to back to back to back. And so when the Nazis overextended themselves in Operation Barbarossa to flood the line, and the Soviets were getting slaughtered. And God, man, you need to hear that speech. The speech that Stalin gave when Hitler invaded. I have never heard a speech that badass. Because you must understand the context, right? These guys formed a pact of steel. Yes, wow about this. I love stuff like this. These guys formed a pact of steel. And they say, people are like, what the fuck? How are you two? But it's a thing of necessity, right? Stalin is not ready for a war. Hitler wants to focus on the East. Hitler wants to focus on the West, meaning he wants to go after Britain and whatnot. And so he was getting rubber and oil and, whatever he needed because Stalin wanted a civil war. But these guys invaded and they started routing tens of thousands of Soviets, but it wasn't necessarily these huge amounts. Stalin gets on and gives the speech. This is not a step back speech. This is not the, not a step back. It's not that. It's the speech when Stalin is finally realizing, oh, fuck, they invaded. And he's like, if the Germans want a war of extermination, they will get. And for the short, for initially, all of these people were being murdered. And it's like, if you're looking at what's taking place, the Soviet Union are having their armies crushed and reformed. The Nazis, who are getting a bloody nose, despite being more proficient, are losing casualties they can't replace theirs, like talking about. And so you get to this spot where the Soviets skill equal and surpass the skill of the Germans. They were learning the entire time, even though they were bloody and lessons. But their military tactics, their military understanding, all of that stuff expanded over the course of those years to when they had that bloody nose, that curse, bloody nose at Moscow, bloody nose, and broken back at Stalingrad. And they limped their way back. Yes, they were still violent and still a brutal bunch, still vicious, but broken. If you read Beaver's book, the Berlin and Stalingrad, read Stalingrad first, and then read Berlin. Oh, it's so good. It's so good. Because you must understand, think of it, there's a thing in human beings' brains of fairness and equity. Look, not everybody has it, right? Some people are so self-centered that it's fucked up. But typically, in a person's brain, when a person does something and something happens to that person, something lights up. Where that person says, that's just. That's deserved. And so it's like, you read Stalingrad and you are horrified by the shit you're reading. My wife was listening, we were playing the game and I was listening to the audiobook and she was like, what the fuck are you listening to? It was that dark. And she was like, dude, I can't listen to this. Like, it's that dark. It's so dark. And I'm sitting there like, I'm a man on the wall. I look into the darkness so you don't. But in this case, she's listening to it also. And so then when you read Berlin, and there's a segment where they're like, we're going to turn Berlin into Stalingrad. Meaning, we're going to Berlin and we're going to do to you what you did to our country. And the wild part about it is, as they were going into Germany, they were like, what the fuck? Are you shitting me? And they were like, look at the wealth. Like, these people invaded us and they're living in this much opulence. Like, it's so wild. Like, the book is fascinating. Because it's a level of revenge that is infinitely deserved. And honestly, when you read those books, you get into this headspace of, are they guilty? As a German living during that time, are you guilty? Even if you weren't a part of it, even if you didn't agree with it, are you guilty? Like, is it a collective stain? When America goes out and does the shit that it does around the globe, am I personally guilty for its crimes, even if I disagree with its crimes, because I am under the government of this country and the tax money that I pay is going to doing those things? I mean, I don't know. I mean, those things are hard to answer. And I suppose on some level, those things just entirely depend on whether you believe it's your fault or not. I don't know. I just think these things are fucking phenomenal. They're fascinating. Garnome, German was fleeing into the American arms. Right. right. They were. That's why Russia was out for blood. They were trying to get Hitler at the last minute was like, maybe we can get a deal with the Americans to fight the Russians. And at that point, he had fucking lost his mind. They were fucking desperate. So desperate. You're guilty only when the person claiming you are has the force to make you feel right. You're guilty if we can institutionally apply force upon you to make you, feel that you're guilty. Yeah. All right, I'm going to end this. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, and I'm going to say subscribe. And I'll see you guys, I don't know, in a few. I have a story that I want to do. So I'll see you guys in a few. Thanks all.